All right. First thing I want to do is thank our partners. We work with partners all over the country for different funding streams, and in particular tonight, the folks that are helping fund the work that we do around small-scale fruit and vegetable production include the Kentucky Agricultural Development Fund. That fund is part of the tobacco settlement dollars that Kentucky receives, and they invest in organizations and producers across the state to re-energize agriculture with the downturn and loss of the tobacco market. We also work with USDA, a few different branches of USDA. We work with Natural Resource Conservation Service, who is in most every county, generally next door to the Farm Service Agency. And also for the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. They fund our Beginning Farmer program, and this is a portion of the Beginning Farmer series. Right. Grow Appalachia is a program of Berea College, and Berea College located in Berea, Kentucky. And we're proud to represent them in the region, representing the 8th grade commitment, which is service to Appalachia. See, the speakers tonight, we got my good friend Kayla Preston, who is our social enterprise manager. Kayla sells and installs high tunnels, manages garden supplies, including organic fertilizers, drip irrigation, other crop management pieces. And we've got Chris McKenzie here. He's our small farm production advisor. And Chris goes out to farms in mainly in the eastern part of the state to help producers develop plans, production plans, and farm plans to make their enterprises more efficient and more profitable. And then I've kind of introduced myself. Again, Mark Walden, I'm the Associate Director with Grow Appalachia, covering mainly production planning support. So most of my support is focused around our farmer development team, which provides technical support directly to producers and farmers, but also our other partners that are throughout Central Appalachia. Right. So food safety on the farm. This picture is from our partners in Abingdon, Virginia. This is Appalachian Sustainable Development. And I share this picture because there's a group of folks that we want to take good care of right in the front there. Some young folks that are learning about growing food. They're learning about ways to do that safely. And you know, we always want them to be able to go in the garden and pick some produce and be able to eat it without major concerns of causing some unfortunate illness or infection. So I just thought that was a lovely picture. So who is most at risk for produce-borne illnesses? And you know what? I missed a few things. Let me add a few things here real quick before we get too deep into this. If you have questions, please feel free to add them into the chat box there at the bottom. And in between presenters, we're going to pause for some questions, and so we'll respond to the questions that are in the chat box. Or you can also unmute and ask us questions openly within the group. So we'll pause in between these presentations. If you can, it sounds like everybody is keeping their microphone muted during the presentation. And so if you could continue that, that would be great. But in between presentations, feel free to jump on here and ask questions and interact with us. Okay, so I meant to say that at the beginning, but now we can get rolling through here. So, so who is most at risk from produce-borne illnesses? in general, small children whose systems haven't fully developed, especially very young children, generally younger than 8 years old, are the most at risk for infections. Their bodies just don't have the exposure at that point to be able to fight off some of these bacterial or viral or parasitic illnesses that could arise from contaminated produce or mishandled produce. And then folks that are older, generally folks over 60 years old, at that point in life, your immune system is not quite as strong as it was previously. And so again, you're fighting a battle with a disease or an illness, and your body's not quite in the best shape to do that. Obviously, that's not everybody above 60, but generally those folks are at a higher risk, and especially if they're in some convalescent living situation. So either assisted living or especially therapeutic environments where they're already in compromised immune systems. And then folks that could be of any age, you see the little button there, it says, hello, I have a compromised immune system. It would be great if folks were comfortable wearing that button all the time, but likely the folks with compromised immune systems are not going to be wearing a sign to let us know that their immune system is compromised. And those folks are at a high risk for serious illness from produce-borne bacterial or viral parasitic loads. So this is a slide that the FDA put together. So these are outbreaks associated with the different produce products. And if you look, generally the highest or the one with the most outbreaks are leafy greens. That's generally because they're very close to the soil. So they can easily pick up soil-borne contaminants. They're harvested by hand, and then they're also generally eaten raw, so they're not cooked. And so that's why you have a high incidence of outbreaks within leafy greens. And then following that are sprouts, and that's because the sprouts are so close to potential either soil. Generally, they're not grown in soil, but because they again are not washed, generally they're not cooked. There's a high incident rate in sprouts as well. And then you get into the melons and cantaloupes. So again, melons and cantaloupes, they're not cooked, so they don't have a kill step, is what they call cooking. And so they can carry those either bacterial or parasitic loads, viral loads, especially cantaloupe, and we'll look at a piece of that later. But the cantaloupe has a netting on it, and that netting on the cantaloupe can be hard to sanitize, essentially. It's got a lot of pockets in it, and so it can capture a lot of generally water, which is contaminated. And then that follows up with tomatoes and berries and herbs. So, almonds are at 1%. Generally, there's not a lot of processing going on there. They're not exposed. They're up on the tree. They're generally not exposed to the soil. They don't have to be harvested by hand much anymore, not on a commercial scale. So you'll see these tree fruits are very low rates of incidence of outbreaks. So the products that are most likely to carry contamination risk. Those products are generally produce that is consumed raw. And we can name a lot of produce that's consumed raw. We've got lettuce and spinach, melons, what else, team? A little bit of everything. So beans generally are not listed in that group because generally you're not going to eat beans raw. There are some that you eat raw, but generally there's going to be a kill step placed on things like beans. We eat tomatoes raw. So anything that you would eat raw could potentially be something that would have a higher rate of contamination. And then products that do not go through a kill step. So generally what we see folks doing with beans in the eastern part of the state is they're canning them. So they're going through a pressure canning process where they bring that jar of beans up to a certain temperature and certain pressure for a specific amount of time. And time and temperature is one of the real tools for killing any contaminant, bacterial or viral, associated with a product. And so if they don't go through that kill step, through that cooking step, you're going to have a higher incidence of contamination on those products. You can see the cantaloupe there in the middle. And I think most of you are probably familiar with cantaloupes. That netting is fibrous. It has a lot of grooves in it, a lot of pockets where things can get trapped in that, what we call netting on the outside. And what can happen is when you slice that cantaloupe, you're contaminating the knife going through the skin, and then your knife is contaminating the meat inside of that melon. If you're in a food service situation, one cantaloupe can then contaminate the next melons down the line, the next ones you process with that same knife. So if you're providing a value-added product like sliced melons or cantaloupes, you have the potential there for contaminating every fruit after that one contaminated unit is cut. And so that's one of the challenges with cantaloupes and melons is if you're going to use it as a value add where you're going to process it down into something else, you have that potential to transfer that contamination across the different products. So the major microorganisms we're concerned about, probably one of the biggest areas are bacterial, and those are things like E. coli, Listeria, and Salmonella. Generally, cold will help control the E. coli and Salmonella. Listeria can survive well in the cold, but also can multiply. So that can be a real problem if you're just refrigerating as your control. And then viruses. So mainly the norovirus is very common, but hepatitis A has had some resurgence over the past 5 years or so. So it's definitely a concern. Generally, the viruses are coming from people. So it's a transfer from one person to the product to the person consuming the product. And then we have parasites. So that's things like Giardia, Toxoplasma, and Cryptosporidium. And those are things that are in the environment that can live on the surface of products. A lot of times you're going to pick them up through the exposure to water. And then those can get transferred into the host, which would be the human that's eating that product. So the contamination sources, again, generally the one that we have most issue with is humans. And so, poor sanitation practices by us and by humans. So things like not washing your hands, coming to work sick, having a cut that you don't care for properly, where you're going to be exposing product your saliva or blood or feces, that exposure to the product is then transferred to the consumer, and that's generally one of the biggest concern areas in agriculture. And then we have animals as a major contaminant, not only farm animals, but pets also. So cats and dogs and ducks and chickens that you may have around as pets. They can expose your products to, especially their feces, but also their saliva. And so that's another source of contamination. Your soil can be a contaminant. There can be bacteria and listeria that live in the soil, can transfer to your product. And if there's not a sanitation step, then it may transfer to the consumer. And then soil amendments, those would be fertilizers or manures. And those obviously can transfer E. coli. They can also transfer dangerous chemicals if you're using chemical fertilizers or other insecticides. Water can be a major contaminant. So you can see these cows enjoying a nice bath here, a cool down out in the farm pond. But then if you then pump that water out of the farm to water the farm pond to water your lettuce, you're introducing that feces soiled water right on top of your plants. And your plants may love it, but the consumer doesn't want to be eating the cow manure. Definitely can make them sick. And then the hand tools that you use. So again, like we talked about with the melons, if you're using a tool on a contaminated product, that tool is then contaminated and must be sanitized. So you got to make sure you're thinking about all the pieces on your farm. So what are the ways that we can reduce the potential for contamination? The first thing you have to do is really step back on the farm and take a look at your processes and your production practices and your, how you improve your soil health, and make a true assessment of the potential risk areas on the farm. And I say step back, and sometimes it helps to have another person there with you that has a different point of view and is not involved in your farm activities, to help give you an outside look at what you think your everyday chores are, may be a potential point for contamination in your produce production. So assessing the farm, creating a food safety plan, and I'll run over an outline of what a food safety plan would look like. We won't be able to delve down into the nitty gritty. We could spend 3 hours just on trying to develop a food safety plan. But this will hopefully get you a good start and help you start thinking about developing that for the farm. It's critical to have the facilities you need when you need them. So if you have people on the farm, they need to have access to a bathroom, not just a tree over on the edge of the field. We don't want people to have to try to find somewhere to use the bathroom while on your farm, because it might end up in a place that impacts your consumers. So you need to have hand washing stations for both yourself and your staff, anybody working with produce or any part of the process. But also, if you have a U-pick operation, you need to make sure the folks, when they enter the field, before they enter, they're able to wash their hands before they start handling your crop. And then you got to make sure that you implement that food safety plan that you develop. You should have documentation through the process, and you should post signs where it's they're easily accessible, they can be seen. And if you have a documentable step in the process, like cleaning tools, you have some sort of form that says Mark cleaned cabbage knives on this date. And that way you can document the process and making sure that all of your processes are followed, and your employees know the process and are following the process as well. So here's a little bit of a produce safety plan outline. And this is from the Young Farmers Coalition. So these are some of the things that you would want included in your plan as you develop it. So the basic description of the farm, what you're growing, how many acres, and then who is in charge of your farm food safety. So generally it's going to be the owner of the farm, but it depends on the scale of your operation and who is managing production. But you need to assign somebody that task. They are the food safety manager. Then you need to develop that risk assessment. So looking at the processes on the farm and making sure that if you have employees or you're going to be bringing in volunteers, people you don't pay that work on the farm still have to follow the food safety plan. So any person that you bring on the farm to work should be able to review the training plans, or should be trained in the food safety plan. They need to know what the sick policies are. So if they're sick, can you put them on a job that doesn't involve handling food on the farm if they really feel like they need to work? Having a plan to pull those employees out of that area where they're potentially contaminating the product and putting them on a job away from potential contamination. If you are the owner of the farm and you're sick, you have to make solid decisions on whether or not you should be handling the produce. It gets really hard when you're so dependent on the income associated with your farm to make that decision. But in the best interest of your consumer, you need to be able to make that decision. And then policies for clothing and jewelry and cell phones. So clothing, making sure that yourself or your employees are wearing clothing that's clean generally. I know that sounds funny on the farm, but if you have somebody harvesting and their shirt's soiled and they're picking up things and holding it against their clothes, there's a potential contamination point. And then cell phones are probably some of the dirtiest things you have on your person. So cell phones go with us everywhere. They go with us in the bathroom, in the office, around lots of people. We handle those all the time, and most people don't clean their cell phones very often. So just making sure that everybody understands those policies. And then, of course, making sure that people understand the hand washing rules around handling produce. So again, you need to have your restrooms and your hand washing stations available. Visitation policies. So if you're going to have folks just visiting the farm, that's wonderful, and it's a great impact to your potential customer base. But you need to make sure that they're practicing good personal sanitation practices, like specifically washing their hands. If you're using raw manure, follow the 90, 120 day rule. So you need to wait 90 days before harvest if the produce that you're growing will not be in contact with the soil, and you need to wait 120 days until harvest if the product is going to come in contact. So if you're growing lettuce, putting manure in the fall, if you're going to grow lettuce in the spring, applying the manure in the fall will give you enough time before it's harvest time for that product to meet that 120 day rule. And you want to manage your wildlife as much as possible. And so having good deer fencing, rabbit and groundhog deterrence would be beneficial. And that last one there, what are your workers supposed to do if they see poop? So if you go in the field and there's been an animal out there and they have left feces in the garden area, you need to have some plan to cordon that area off and not harvest from that area for consumption by a customer or someone. So you need to have a plan in place when when the wildlife does come in the garden, because it's almost impossible to keep all the wildlife out of the garden. And birds, there's really no way to keep birds from flying over. All right, I know that was a lot of information really quick. Somebody that can help us develop these food safety plans. If you're at the level that you're ready to start looking at wholesale and retail production, you scaled up from farmers market and CSA, and you're ready to start thinking about contracting with larger buyers, you can reach out to Brian Brady. He is the Senior Extension Associate, the Food Safety Extension Associate at University of Kentucky. And Brian can help you prepare for a gap audit, look at your Food Safety Modernization Act compliance, and make sure that you have thought through the food safety assessment for your farm. So Brian can be that other person there helping you assess the farm for your food safety impacts. And that is the end of my quick session on potential contamination points. All right, do we have any questions yet? No. Chris, do we have anything in the chat box?
Mark, I didn't see anything in the chat box to this point, but folks, just let me know if I'm missing something.
And I'm going to be passing it off to Chris here. We'll give folks another minute. If you're a little hesitant to ask a question, you're in a safe space. We welcome any question that you have. So. The Zoom silence. All right, thank you, folks. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. If you feel like you want to just message me individually and don't want it broadcast to the entire group, you can select who you're sending it to. And again, I'm Mark Walden. Feel free to send a question over. And I will turn it over to Mr. Chris McKenzie here.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get rolling here. All right, just give me a thumbs up if everybody can see that. Just a quick follow-up on Mark's section. You know, if you're at the farmers market level, I think it's a great idea for you to attend the produce best practice training. I did go ahead and put that in the chat, but that's available through your local county extension offices. And that will give you a more in-depth class on what Mark just talked about and lead to some certifications where you can actually, you know, be able to offer samples at the farmers market, which can be a big asset for you. So be sure to, if you're at the farmers market level, I highly recommend doing the produce best practices training through your local extension office. All right, so I'm going to be talking about post-harvest considerations, you know, for quality and safety and all of those other things. So first, I want to just kind of put out there, you know, what's at stake here? What are we really talking about? Why is this important? Really, folks, this can make or break a small-scale farmer. You know, this food quality aspect is extremely important, and you know, we're serving as small-scale local food producers. We're serving a niche market of folks who expect high-quality products so that we can sell at the price point that we need to be able to make money, right? So most of us aren't selling wholesale. Most of us are actually trying to get better than, you know, Walmart and what's on the shelf at the stores, so that folks are buying our products so that we can be competitive in the market. So part of that is your reputation as a farm, you know, is at stake in terms of the quality and shelf life of the produce that you can deliver. Of course, there's competitions from other farms and outlets. So, you know, if you're only selling a product that's kind of at the Walmart level of freshness, then, you know, folks are going to pay Walmart prices, and that can be really difficult to keep up with as a small scale producer. You really need to be charging premium prices for your product in order to you know, make money or go beyond the hobby level, right? And Mark talked a little bit about kind of the liability aspect. We don't want anything to come back to our farm in terms of safety problems. And, you know, really the reputation of regionally produced local food as a whole is at stake here, because if one of us as a farmer makes a mistake, you know, it does come back, that reputation does come back to our fellow farmers in the region, right? If somebody ever got sick, or if a restaurant buys a bad product, you know, it can dissuade people from buying from farmers markets and local farmers. You know, they're going to go back to their wholesale outlets, which is bad for business for everybody. So we're all in this together. Now, different markets are going to have different expectations in terms of what you're trying to present. Farmers market, again, this is a niche market where we're trying to produce above and beyond, you know, what's available at a standard grocery store. We want fresh looking produce that holds up well. We want to package that in small amounts that's easily usable. You know, probably very few people are coming to buy big boxes of carrots there. So we want small bite-sized amounts that folks can take home and fix for their families. Vibrant and diverse displays, right? We need to pull people into our market booths. And so if we've just got, you know, a cooler sitting behind us and a sign out that says carrots for sale, that's not really what we want. We need to go above and beyond in that regard. Restaurants are going to need clean and uniform products that have a long shelf life and excellent flavor. And they need to be packaged for efficient storage, right? So they've got a limited amount of storage, walk-in coolers and things like that. And so there's certain expectations there which you need to be communicating with your buyers about. How do they expect, not only in terms of the quality, but how it's packaged so that they can use it efficiently, right? And also there's going to be different crops. Different crops are going to require a lot of different things, and we'll go into a little bit more of that for each individual crop. But it's really going to be on a crop to crop basis. And so we're going to send you all some resources after this course via email that will go into, that'll be a crop by crop profile on how to, you know, cool and store and harvest your produce for best management practices. So before we ever get even started harvesting, we need to have some pre-harvest considerations. So especially for growing things close to the ground, mulch can be really useful for keeping dirt and debris out of your crop. That may mean the difference between you having to wash a crop and not, which we'll talk about how important that can be here in a little bit. But mulch can be a really important step to keeping your crop clean and keeping things safe as well. So trellising. So if you can trellis things like cucumbers, tomatoes, beans, keeping those things up off the ground away from contaminants, and also makes it a lot easier and more efficient for you to harvest too, right? So there's not just a food safety aspect there, but an efficiency piece. And again, if we can keep from washing these crops, that's going to save us a lot of time and labor down the road. As Mark talked about, pest exclusion is important, keeping things from pooping on our crops. You know, a lot of us are using high tunnels and protected agriculture at this point, which is fantastic for from a food quality and safety standpoint. because we're not getting that overhead rainfall. Things aren't splashing up on our crops. We're getting up to twice the yield in terms of marketable produce from things like tomatoes, because this crop is protected from wind, from insect, from water damage. And so it's these things are game changers in terms of produce quality and safety. And so highly recommend looking into those systems if you don't have that already. If we're using anything for pest and disease control, I think Mark talked about the safety aspect of that. So just making sure that we're following the labels of each and every product that's introduced to our farms and gardens, and making sure that if we need to, we're not harvesting until it's safe to harvest at the allotted amount after you spray. So the key takeaway from that is just read the labels for all the products that you use and make sure that you're following the label. There's extensive guidelines for each product that you'll use in terms of pest and disease control in the garden. When it does come time to harvest, we want to think about the stage of the crop. Is it ready to harvest? Is it too early, too late in terms of ripeness and things like that? The time of day is going to be important for keeping our crops cool when we harvest. The harvesting method, whether you're picking, cutting, those kinds of things, we want to make that process especially efficient. And what am I going to harvest into? Again, that goes to efficiency and also keeping the products whole. So when we get to stage of crop, we're going to think about size. I'm just going to use the example of cucumber for a moment. If we go out and we harvest those baseball bat sized cucumbers and we take them to the market, we know that they're going to be full of seeds, they're going to be bitter. So size plays a role along with maturity in when we want to harvest that crop. And again, this is going to be kind of a crop to crop specific thing. And in those profiles I talked about, there's going to be those types of considerations, and it's not going to be the same for every crop or farm. So for tomatoes, for example, some folks are going to pick them at the perfectly ripe stage. I've got stage 7 here is the completely red stage. And that's okay, but it's going to reduce the shelf life, right? So if you really need to emphasize the amount of shelf life that your tomatoes got, you could pick it at this number 5, this pink stage, and it will ripen after a few days and be ready for a farmer's market, and it'll hold up better that way. In terms of time of day, usually earlier in the day is going to be better, and I'm talking way early, right? When the crop is still cool, you haven't had the sunlight to come out and start heating things up. You're minimizing heat and solar exposure. This is particularly important for cool sensitive crops, like your leafy greens, lettuces, kale, those types of things. Your cool weather root crops, cabbages. You want to make sure that you're harvesting very early in the day before the sunlight has had a chance to heat those crops up, because by 3 p.m. They're going to be wilty, and they're going to stay wilty. Even it doesn't matter how hard you try to cool them. So harvest time does matter. And in some cases, you may be trying to minimize moisture. For example, if you're trying to harvest tomatoes, you don't want to be spreading the diseases that can be spread through a moist crop. So you may wait till that crop dries out. And we know that tomatoes aren't quite as heat sensitive as some other things. So time of day is going to play a big role. Your harvest method, right? Again, this is not only about safety, but also about efficiency, right? So this greens harvester over here on the left can be a game changer in terms of if you're growing, beds worth of greens, and it's fairly food safe and efficient. And then most folks are probably going to be at a smaller scale though than that. So for greens, you may be using a knife. So making sure that that's sharp and sanitized and clean. You can also, in some cases, use these clippers for harvesting, like finding crops, cucumbers and things like that. So just using the right tool for the trade to make sure that your harvest is efficient and safe, and so that you're not, poking big holes in your crop and things like that when you go to harvest. And it also matters what you harvest into, right? So for tomatoes, I highly recommend harvesting into something where you just have one layer, and maybe something that you can stack. So you're not putting tomato on top of tomato, say in a 5-gallon bucket, but you're putting them in one line in a tray in a row. A trick that my mentor Bill Best taught me is to go ahead and put some newspaper or something like that down in the bottom, so that if a tomato does have a bad spot or something like that and it starts to leak, that newspaper can sop that up and it doesn't spread to the rest of the tomato. But the key here is just to have a few, most of us are growing a diverse number of crops. It's not just one thing. So pick maybe 3 or 4 harvest bins that are the most appropriate for the crops that you grow. For lettuce, you can harvest into some of these green tubs that you see here, and they drain really well, and you can maybe even use those tubs through your washing process. For smaller things, like berries, you want to pick into a smaller container so they're not, again, stacking up on each other, and the weight of the berries is crushing the ones underneath. So just making sure you're keeping track of those kinds of considerations and have the appropriate equipment on hand to keep the produce quality high. For washing crops, there's a couple of different approaches, and I'll just talk about the ones that we're most likely to use on our scale. And the primary one is just not to wash or to not use water at all. And that's probably in most cases going to be the safest way to go, because you're not introducing another potential contaminant through the water. If you are using water, you're going to want to use water that has been that comes from a municipal source, a potable source. And then you may want to use a sanitizing step too there, adding a product called Sanidate or Tsunami into your water at the appropriate level to kill any pathogens that might be in there. And another method that we can use, especially for like root crops, is spraying. Washing your crops is going to be a decision that you have to make for each crop. Do you wash or do you not? And it's going to depend on your market and customer preferences. How much dirt or debris is already present in your crop? As I mentioned before, if you've got maybe a mulch, maybe you don't have to do that much washing. And it's also going to depend on your available washing labor and infrastructure, right? If you just don't have those things available, that limits you in terms of what markets you can serve. And so, in a lot of cases, it's worth considering scaling up your washing facilities in order to be able to serve like a restaurant market, or be able to have a cleaner product that kind of outshines your competitor at the farmer's market. So carefully consider that for your farm. How much time and labor is going to go into it, and what infrastructure do you need? So if you're thinking about leafy greens, for example, as a potential crop, and you think you might have to wash that, think about what that's going to add in terms of the infrastructure on your farm. And Kayla's going to talk more about kind of what Kentucky farmers are doing right now to wash various crops. So I'm just kind of skimming the surface here, and she's going to go into some more depth on this stuff. But I just want to make sure that we're all thinking about the different elements of this and how this is going to apply to our farms. Root crops, some of these may need to be cured, and we need to pay close attention to what root crops might need to be cured. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Spray tables are pretty popular for root crops. And again, Kayla's going to show more of that, but this is a way to spray down your crop and then have it drain there. And that's pretty appropriate for things like carrots and beets and things like that. And in some cases, you might just want to knock the dirt off, wipe it down, again, so that you're not adding the water contaminant element. So it's just going to depend on what your market is and how dirty the crop is. But usually if we're pulling something out of the ground, it's going to have some dirt caked on it. So in many cases, root crops are going to need some kind of washing step before, you don't want to just plop a bunch of carrots down on the table and have dirt kind of clumping off of it. That's probably not going to be appealing to most customers. Root crops that need to be cured include potatoes, unless you're doing like new potatoes, for example. Potatoes need to form that skin on the outside that protects them and adds the storage and shelf life that we're used to. Sweet potatoes, onions, and garlic, all of these need to develop that outer layer that's going to help preserve them. And in the case of sweet potatoes, if you don't cure them, the starch doesn't have an opportunity to turn to sugar. So you're just going to have a really starchy sweet potato if you just sell one that comes right out of the ground, and your customer's probably not going to appreciate that. So leafy greens, dunking and sanitizing is pretty a popular option. Again, Kayla's going to go into more detail about what folks are doing here. In some cases, you may need multiple levels of washing. So if you've got a really dirty batch of greens that may need to get the initial dirt off before you move it over into the clean water and sanitizing stage. And then you're going to have to figure out, of course, how to dry those, right? And again, Kayla's going to show some techniques for that. And in some cases, if you've got a clean product, and you're conscious about putting a sign on it that says it's not been washed, so that your consumers are aware, that can be an option there as well. For most fruit crops, I recommend not washing. Fruit crops are pretty notorious for absorbing contaminants from wash water. And so in most cases, what you're going to want to do, if you have a blemish or something like that, you can wipe it down with a dry cloth. But in most cases, you won't be washing fruit, because that can be an issue. Now, we've got to have a place to do all of this. And I tell you, if you're going to be washing a lot, you want that place to be as efficiently laid out as possible, and also laid out in a way that makes sense in terms of food safety. So we're going to start from the field. We're going to go around to however we're washing our wash step, either that's a spray or a dunk. Like I said about the lettuce, we may need a second wash step there. And that's going to go to a place where we can dry the product. And that comes around to where we weigh and bag the product. And so by the time it goes out, it hasn't crossed paths. So we're not overlapping our dirty product with our clean product, right? We don't want to set a dirty, a bin full of dirty produce somewhere where our clean product is going to go. So if we can kind of make that a fairly linear process where we've got dirty in and clean out, that's going to be the best and most efficient layout in most cases. So in terms of cooling crop, right, we've got our crops clean, and most crops that we're harvesting are going to perform better, have longer shelf life if it's been cooled, especially if that cooling step right after it gets out of the field. So we've got a couple of ways of doing that. We've got refrigeration, we've got hydrocooling, which just means we're using water, in a dunk or a spray. And then in some cases we can use ice. But I want to point out how important this aspect can be for your crop, because this example uses strawberries. And you see here how after about an hour, our marketable percentage of the crop goes way down. It plummets if we're not getting that crop cool. And that's because those pathogens that come with it out in the field have time to develop and build up when it's not cool. And so it's going to break down faster. All right, so it's not just a safety thing, it's also how long that produce is going to last in your consumer's refrigerator. So if you've got a restaurant client, they're going to be really looking for something that stays on the shelf for, you know, a week or two, and you're going to need to be able to deliver that. Different cooling methods can be faster or slower depending on what they are. So, you know, room cooling or refrigeration is probably going to be the slowest, and that may not be adequate for some crops. And so that's where hydro cooling can come in, especially if you find yourself not being able to harvest as early as you'd hoped. You know, you can go ahead and harvest quickly and get maybe some leafy greens into that hydro cooling step, maybe even using some ice to really get the field heat out of that crop so that it's not breaking down faster than you want to. And in some cases, we can even use top ice, which is probably going to be the quickest for things like sweet corn and broccoli. For the most part, a lot of small scale producers aren't using that. But if you ever think about scaling up, you know, if you're harvesting truckloads of sweet corn, for example, top icing can be really beneficial. And the next step is storage, right? We've got our crop cool, we've washed it. Where are we going to put it? So we want to consider temperature, humidity, how much moisture is in the air, sunlight. You know, most of our products we're going to want to keep well out of sunlight. And then a lot of produce is going to off gas. A lot of produce emits what's called ethylene gas, which is a gas that will speed up the decomposition process. And so if we're storing in something that isn't able to breathe, we're going to get a buildup of that ethylene gas, which can affect the product itself as well as any product that's surrounding it, right? And again, these considerations are going to be on those crop profiles that we'll share with you. And temperatures are going to be different in terms of what to store which crop at. And so a lot of producers are going to be using, you know, a couple of different temperatures to store their produce at for optimum. You know, not everybody's going to have this option, but if you can, there's kind of two zones that we can look at in terms of storage. The really cool zone, which is great for berries, greens, onions, leeks, carrots, beans, asparagus, turnips, and radishes. And that's between about 32 degrees and 40 degrees. And then slightly, well, actually quite a bit warmer than that. So say about 60 degrees. We have peppers and summer squash and zucchini, tomatoes, basil, cucumbers, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and melons. So they don't like it as cool, and things like tomatoes, for example, can lose a lot of their flavor if you really refrigerate them. So tomatoes in particular can take up to temperatures of, you know, being stored in like 70 degrees. So if you've got a place in your house where you can stack the trays, that can work. But for everything else, it's best to have it a little bit cooler. All right, and finally, we're at the kind of the final step. So packaging for farmers market. We want to make sure that our displays are vibrant, that they're diverse, that, you know, folks can come out and see that there's a lot of produce that you have on your table. If you've, like I said, if you just got a sign for the different products you have and they're all in coolers, that's not as attractive to somebody walking by as if you've got it all laid out on the table. So I think a lot of folks are using this strategy where they have these big vibrant displays, and this works really well. It's worked for me in the past. I like to incorporate cut flowers into mine so that I have this really standout display at a farmer's market to help bring people into my booth. We can bundle with strings or bands, and this can be really efficient versus selling, you know, per pound. or something like that, or keeping things in bags. We can use paper cartons. In some case, plastic bags can work for like leafy greens and things. Baskets, you know, and it's just going to be easier than selling by weight at the farmer's market. It's going to be more efficient, and you know, you're not handling your product as much, having to pick things out and weigh things. So it's usually a better idea to sell by the bundle or the bunch or the bag. So that's a good approach there. Now, if we're thinking about restaurant sales or farm to school or other institutions, you know, you're going to really want to coordinate with them about how they want that product to be delivered and stored. So a lot of folks are using these wax line boxes so that they can be stored efficiently. But that's something that you need to coordinate with your with your buyer. All right, so that's kind of a skim overview of what to think about for you know, post-harvest quality and safety. Kayla's about to go into some more depth about what folks are actually using out in the field and how all that works. But before that, does anybody have any questions about some of the things that I just covered? I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Mark, did you see anything come up there in the chat?
I didn't. So do you know what folks are doing in the age of COVID with as far as people handling products at the farmer's market on your table, and you know, that potential contamination risks there? Do you know what the best practices are for that, the current environment?
Yeah, so the information that I got, and I will say this was as of fall of 2020, from Brian. You know, Brian emphasized that COVID is not a you know, a food safety issue as much as it is, you know, an issue of you know, air and breathing contamination. So it's still a factor. And so a lot of folks are using gloves when they handle their produce. They're keeping a bottle of hand sanitizer available so that they can continually sanitize their hands. Of course, they're trying to keep that social distancing across the table. But in terms of, you know, best practices are really going to be on the consumer end, because they're going to buy that product and take it home and hopefully get it washed and sanitized. Because, you know, you're going to have people breathing on your produce. You're going to have people picking up and handling. If you can minimize that, and honestly, it's going to be down to probably the individual farmers markets in a lot of cases, and what they're implementing and putting in place to keep folks safe. So if anybody else has any other thoughts or input on that, that's kind of the best that I know at the moment.
A question that I had typed in is, we're harvesting from hydroponic towers. Would you recommend wearing gloves, or is the hand washing sufficient? Just curious about that with harvesting and when working with the towers.
Yeah, Mark's focus has been the food safety, so I'm going to let him take that question. Mark, do you have any thoughts there?
Can you repeat the question? I'm not sure I caught the.
Yes, we are harvesting from hydroponic towers, and was just curious if you would recommend wearing gloves during the harvest, or if the hand washing is sufficient.
Yeah, I think either will work as long as you're intentional about using one or the other. You should probably wash your hands before you put on gloves as well. But I think hand washing would be sufficient as long as you were thorough in hand washing. Yeah, so the hand, it can be, a lot of folks don't like to wear gloves because you lose some of that tactile ability. So, as far as food safety, restaurants generally use gloves, but they're handling a lot of different products in a lot of different ways. So I think with kind of the one process that you're doing, that hand washing would be sufficient.
Yeah. And Woody put into the chat here that in terms of farmers markets, a lot of folks are recommending that the vendor handle the product, and that goes back to what I talked about in terms of packaging. If you can have your stuff packaged as a bundle that you can just hand to somebody or put in a bag for somebody, that's going to eliminate the need for the consumer to handle it or for you to handle it, so that you can do that weigh step. So that's yeah.
Chris, we also had a question from Arthur. It's going to be harvesting 500 pounds of Kennebec potatoes a week for a restaurant. When they clean the first few harvests, their concern is that it's going to spray the skin off of those new potatoes in the process. But the harvest in later weeks will have a little tougher skin as they cure. Will it be an issue for the skin to come off before delivery?
Mm-hmm. So for the most part, my understanding, and folks are welcome to jump in here if they've got a different perspective. My understanding for most root crops, you don't want to get wet before they go through the curing process. And especially for, I think that's a little bit more the case for things that are like garlic and onions that are developing a skin that can trap that moisture. But if it were me, I would harvest and just do my best to kind of knock the dirt off and wait until the potato had been cured before and had time to develop that skin, because the skin isn't just developing in the ground, it's also developing through the curing process. And my thought is it's best not to interfere with that by spraying it down. Any other thoughts on that?
Really, the getting it wet is just an issue with storage. These will be used about as soon as I get them to the restaurant.
Okay.
And I know they want them clean, but last year was the first year I supplied to a restaurant, and it just so happened I started after the vines had died for a week or so, so they'd hardened off a little bit in the ground, and I wasn't spraying skin off. I did a test harvest just the other day, and I want to start this weekend full scale. And if I just barely hit them with a hose, I knock the skin off right now, which is great if you're going to cook right then.
Exactly.
But not if they're going to keep them for about a week.
Right. And so that, that kind of has to be coordinated with whoever you're working with there at your market. How long are they going to be in storage? Because you're right, if you knock that skin off, it's going to be a shorter storage life for sure. And I know Kennebecs can benefit from up to 2 weeks of curing time, so that that skin can continue to develop. But in those earlier stages, it may at that point you're almost harvesting what we call a new potato, so that may be out of your hands at that point.
Each whole purpose, I was growing potatoes because I had more room to let them wait, and now I'm finding out I don't have that weight.
Right. Yeah, it's a tricky balance for sure. Anybody else have any thoughts or input on that particular problem with potatoes? I know for the most part that earlier in the season I sell mine as new potatoes, and later I would try to cure them for more of a storage potato.
Yeah, it sounds like Arthur's in a unique situation there with the restaurant ready for the potatoes and probably ready to process them.
Yeah.
So it's a little unique. Arthur, I would recommend that you tell that restaurant to wash them even though you clean them. At least to do some kind of rinse on them, because when you're rinsing them and you take that skin off, which is a bit of a protective layer, you're potentially exposing those other potatoes to soil from the potatoes you're spraying the soil off of. So any product that you sell, unless you have a really strong food safety plan that's had a gap audit, you should recommend your customers wash their produce before eating it. Just a good practice.
Yeah, this has made me think it through. I'm gonna dig a small sample tomorrow and just take them by the restaurant and drop them off and talk to them about it.
That's a great idea. That's exactly what I will do, I think. All right, well, I want to go ahead and make sure that we have plenty of time for Kayla's section here. She's got some really great stuff to show off in terms of what some of our local producers are using in terms of the washing and packing step. So Kayla, take it over.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm going to share my screen here with you all and get started. Thanks so much for hanging out with us this evening. I'm sure it has been a beautiful day, so I know how hard it is sometimes to come in a little bit early and get on the computer, so we do appreciate it. Can you see everything all right? Yes, awesome. Okay, so yeah, like Chris and Mark said, I'm Kayla. I am the social enterprise manager for GROW, and so I'm mostly building and constructing the high tunnels and doing all the installation when it comes to irrigation and water catchment. So that's roof water runoff off of high tunnels. We also do irrigation installs in the fields. And so we also sell lots of garden supplies that go hand in hand with the high tunnels. So I run a whole garden supplies catalog. Y'all can find that on our website. Mostly local pickup in Berea. We do ship it, but as you all know, shipping's quite expensive. So that's why we started carrying this stuff, is because there isn't a local vendor in our area that carries stuff like ground cover and hortanova and tomato twine and things like that. And so that's why we got started on that. But that's just a little bit of the gist of what I do with GROW, as well as help Mark with the Beginning Farmer Mentorship Program. This is, we're in our second year. And so, yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit with you all on the tour part of this workshop. So we went to several different places around our area. These are the three places that we have visited, and took lots of pictures and videos and just really got to know the farmer systems a little bit better, to where we could share it with you all virtually, since we couldn't have really gone out there all together. So we'll be taking a peek at Wolf Gap Gardens out of here in Berea. They are in their second year of production, and they have a really awesome startup system that I wanted to share with you all first, as well as Rough Draft Farmstead out of Lawrenceburg. We're going to focus in on a specific foot-pedaled, foot-powered root washer that he has engineered with a friend of his. And then we're also going to check out the Berea College Greenhouse and Gardens wash pack stations. They've got a pretty beefed up operation out there. You know, they sell a lot of their produce to the Berea College Farm Store. If you all are familiar with that at all, I would highly recommend you stop by if you all are ever in town. Really delicious food, and you can buy all sorts of really yummy produce and things like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started with Wolf Gap Garden. So they're here in Berea, not too far away. So they sell at farmers markets around the area in Richmond. And recently received a grant through Kentucky State University to help them out build this wash pack station. So as you all see, it's pretty low key, but has all of the key parts that you need. They've got sinks, they've got different tables. And I mean, you see the list there. So the total of this setup was roughly $2,700, and that's not including the labor. And it also has a drainage ditch under there. So The majority of their materials were bought off of eBay. They were not used, but they were just, I guess, just a cheaper version of what you see there. So yeah, that is the overall perspective of it. And then I'm kind of going to go into smaller pictures of their different components. So as you see, we've got a double basin sink. They chose this sink specifically because it fit their containers that they harvest into. And so that's something that you all want to consider when you're thinking about what you're going to purchase. And then the root washing station, as you see, is just a shelf, which makes it pretty easy to wash down. They're just using a water hose and spraying off the root crops as they go through, and then transferring them over to the table. The table that you see Maggie here, Maggie and her mother Melinda are the two ladies that run that farm and do a rocking job at it. So super glad to be working with them. Right here, Maggie is doing some weighing and taking notes and all that documentation that you have to, which field it's from or which plot of the field it's from. And so we kind of got an idea of how they run that system there. And then they've also got this canopy. That canopy they take down every winter. And so that's something to think about if you're going to do a permanent structure or you're going to do something, a little bit less investing. But, they did mention that you definitely want to make sure that it's tied down properly and that it doesn't fly away in the wind. So just wanted to show you all a few pictures. And then the other thing that they mentioned that's kind of like pro tip was the scales. So they bought 2 different scales, and one's for larger amounts, like larger weights, and the other one's for smaller. And they actually wish they would have got it down to the decimal compared just by the pound, so where they know actually the exact amount. So this is the inside of their wash and pack station. This is just inside the barn there behind the sink that I just showed you in that picture. This is just a standard fridge that is adjustable. So unfortunately, you can only adjust it to one temperature. So think about how you're going to utilize this system if you're going to be growing crops that need different temperatures for storage. And then they have a room temperature storage shelf right over here. And you see those containers are the exact containers that they use to harvest into or do the outside processing in. So it's a lot less transferring back and forth and less work on their end. So that's the stepping stone, like the introductory system that I wanted to share with you all. Another focus that I wanted to get into was this really cool, it's just so neat in my opinion. It's the foot powered root washing station. Here's some pictures of it, and I would have loved to share a video with you. This is actually available on YouTube. Chris is going to drop the YouTube link into the chat box so you all can check it out. So this is Jesse Frost. He's with the No-Till Growers, also known, and his farm is Rough Draft Farmstead. So Jesse does a lot of carrots, like pounds and pounds and pounds. I mean, he's doing large scale. And so he just realized that all of the time that it took him to wash roots by like one hand spraying and one hand holding just wasn't working out. And he knew that labor is the most costly thing on the farm. And so he's got together with one of his engineer friends, and they created this foot powered washer. And the cool thing about this washer is that you can do a lot of things with it. I mean, you can wash your containers, you can wash your hands. I mean, you can wash really anything with it. And then it could be a drying rack if you're not actually processing things on it. You could expand it and make it longer or taller. That he did mention in the video that it was a little bit farther away from his body than he wanted. So that was like an idea that he may wanted to change. And then just how efficient it is. 2 hands, and you're not having to worry about bending over and breaking your back. It just makes so much sense. And then he's got this secondary sprayer right here if he misses a spot or anything like that. And so he's got all of the specs and the materials list and everything on YouTube on the description. So I would highly recommend you all check that out. He's also willing to talk with you. He said it was open source. So if you wanted to dive in it even deeper or share with him whatever you came up with, I know that they'd be really happy and willing to take all of those in and do something with them. And then the other thing is you want to think about your drainage. So when you're washing these crops, like where is all of that water going to go? Is it going into the gravel? Is it going into gravel that's a little bit above a really wet part of your property? You know, do you want to install a drainage ditch? Do you want to harvest the water? You know, do you want to use it for the pond or for something like that? You know, so you could think about water catchment after that. You could think about doing some just simply, you know, underground PVC into a lower part of the farm where you're hoping to get more water. So just things that you all want to consider when you're designing your own system, because it will vary. The next tour that we're going to go on is Berea College Gardens and Greenhouse. So they have definitely, it's a very much larger system. As you all see here, I mean, they've got an entire indoor facility with concrete floors. You know, they've invested a lot into this system. And I'm going to show you some more pictures on the next slides, but you see they've got 3-basin sink. They've already got their sanitizer ran to it. They've got hot water installed there. You know, lots and lots of table space, easy cleanup. They could easily just spray down the floor and mop it up and be done. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, and so lots of table space. You could you put stuff under there. I see like a little shelf under the main table, so you could use that for storage of your containers and things like that, because some of the rules is you have to keep everything up off the floor. So you want to think about how to keep things lifted up. And then, sorry, I'm gonna go back one last time. And then the second picture over here to the right. So that's just the super large sanitized bucket system or a 3-basin sink system, but like really beefy. And it's outdoors, it's protected. It's not protected from bugs and things like that. So that's something that you may want to think about when you are designing your system, but easily done. Looks like it's just on some cinder blocks, like not that expensive. And it's a way to process a lot of produce at one time, if that's what you're growing, you know. And that's the other thing that I wanted to show and share with you all, is you really want to think about the size of your operation. So, you know, this greens bubbler looks really cool. I mean, it's got a jacuzzi pump. Like, I kind of want to get in that greens bubbler, you know. I mean, it looks fun. So it looks fancy and fun, but it's also really expensive and it's really large. So you want to think about, are you even harvesting that much produce in one setting to make it worth your while of investing in all of those pieces and building it, and then filling it, you know, the everyday activity of filling it, cleaning it, draining it, so on and so forth, could get quite time consumptive. And then, but the other beautiful side of this is that all of these 3 pictures right here are perfectly compatible with one another. So you can just scoop up your greens from your harvest, the bubbler with your container, and then that container actually fits right down into what we call a salad spinner. That is actually designed from an old washing machine. So pretty much just wire stripped, a couple of pieces removed, and we're going to share this material with you all, like Chris said later on. But yeah, not too difficult to do, but is very large. You know, you want to think about at least 20 pounds of material, roughly a spin or a cycle. So if you don't have that much, it may not be what you want, but it is pretty. And then the next slide I'm going to take you all to, and Chris has already shared a little bit of this, is walk-in cooler. So you want to think about your cool areas. How big of a walk-in cooler do you need, and what best fits your system? So these guys have got a CoolBot AC system, and it depends on how large your walk-in cooler is and how well insulated and things like that. But can roughly run you about $600 if you all are thinking about, you know, just asking yourself how much. So also drop any questions into the chat. I haven't been able to look in there since I've been presenting, so sorry if I missed those. Yeah, so they've got a couple of different coolers, and so they're able to set the coolers at different temperatures, and they're just super large and plenty of room for all of the harvest from the week. And they have these really awesome signs just right out the door. Quick reference, couldn't be bad for you, definitely not bad for your employees, just as a quick reminder, or like a stop sign, like, oh, this is the wrong fridge, just something like that, so you just don't get lost in transition. Okay, so that's the overview of the tours. Just some key takeaways. Like I've said, y'all, just think about your scale and how much you are producing and harvesting, and make sure that that's compatible to the system that you're thinking about setting up. So you can think about next steps, just what can be done today, what can be done tomorrow, one project at a time. Not all of this is going to happen overnight. And especially the bigger your systems are, the more expensive they're going to be. So think about budgeting, start looking out for funding. So there's loan opportunities, there's grant opportunities. And so I'm going to share a couple of those with you all. So these are the 3 different loan or grant opportunities that I'm going to share with you all tonight. The KSU Small Farm Grant is the grant that the Wolf Gap Gardens received. And so you can receive up to $5,000 with that grant, but you as a farmer have to make more than $1,000 and less than $250,000 a year. So is a good chunk of change to get your, to get a new project going on your farm. Won't cover everything, but covers a lot. So you saw, like, they pretty much got an entire wash station for, that covered from the grant. So it's just really great all around if you're able to apply for it. And there is, it's on their website, and Chris, please drop that in the chat if you haven't already. And then we've got well, real quick, so certified organic, this is kind of what that funding goes for. Anything to help with value added, anything to help with aquaculture, hydroponics, and any folks that live in specifically food insecure areas, they will help with that. So SOAR, the other one that you see on the screen here, Small Production Loan Fund. So this is a very, very low interest loan. So it is not a grant. You will have to pay it back, but it is at a very low interest by way of the Kentucky Highlands Investment Corporation. So they help with that as well. Definitely recommend you all checking that out. And then the last one there is the CAPE program, which is the County Agriculture Investment Program. And this is actually funneled down from the Tobacco Settlement Fund that comes, the funding that gets divvied out everywhere. Now in every county in Kentucky, you are eligible to apply for this program. It is a 50-50 cost share program, and it covers everything on your farm from fencing to on-farm energy to on-farm water, animals, fowl, soil amendments. You're trying to introduce diversity to your farm, so like cover cropping or pollinators, things like that. That 50-50 cost share will go towards. So then some other resources. Chris actually showed one earlier, and it was great. It was an awesome chart of all the different tips and things like that. This one here is really interesting. It's from UC Davis, and it is the vegetable produce fact sheet. And you can just click on any of these vegetables here, and it's going to take you into, like you're in a textbook or something, into all the different types of maturity indicators, things like the temperatures that, that they need to be cooled in and things like that, or not. So just really, really fun. And Chris, if you wouldn't mind to drop that into the chat either for these guys, or we'll just send it out with the rest of our information later. And then this last one here is storage conditions. I thought that this one was really cool. It comes from the University of Maine, but it gives you the symptoms of what the crops will do once they are not in optimum conditions. So I just thought that was really unique. I haven't really came across something like that. And mostly it's just temperatures and things like that. So I'm like a big visionary learner. So it's good to see that. All right, y'all, that is all I've got. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here. I can figure that out. It's been a while since I've been on Zoom. Crazy. Okay.
All right, Kayla, I'm trying to look back. I think most questions were answered. Lori asked about where to find those baker racks, or at least that's what I call them. There's been a few responses.
I believe they got them from eBay, but I know you can get them from not secondary, but they're just like discount restaurant stores. Mark, you used to own a restaurant.
Yeah, so there's Seaworth in Lexington that I've heard good things about. But that they're in Cincinnati. They're generally the restaurant supply stores and they have aftermarket or used equipment as well. You just have to kind of call and see what they have and see if it fits what you're trying to do. I purchased some fairly recently off of Amazon, and they're reasonably priced. But if you have to pay shipping, then it really makes it not a good option. So Amazon, Prime generally ships for free, but those restaurant supply stores are available in most large cities.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going through the chat here. Is there anything else that I've missed? I think that was about it. Oh, Jesse Frost's new book. Yes, I read like the first 3 pages, and yes, it's wonderful. I'm really excited to dive more into it. I unfortunately have not been able to really get into the nitty gritty of it, but I already really like the layout. So yeah, it's awesome, Lori. Okay.
Lori,
Oh, sorry.
I was just saying, Lori introduced me to a delicious restaurant in Paintsville. I said Pineville, but it's actually Paintsville, Kentucky, last week. Amazing guacamole.
I've got a poll, you all. If there's no questions remaining for me or Mark or Chris, I've got a last little poll that I would like to send out to you all before we head out. Chris or Mark, y'all got any last remarks before I drop the poll?
Well, I just want to say that we'll be sending a follow-up packet to everybody's email with all of these resources included, links to all of these resources. We've been able to shoot some video out at like the Wilder Farm, and they gave us a nice little tour of their wash pack station. So we hope to turn that into video format and share that with you all at some point. We did opt not to do video tonight just because we've had issues with people's bandwidth not being able to view video over Zoom. And so we feel like it's a little bit better to go ahead and just send out the link so everybody can just watch it at your leisure. But I did want to say that if you need to get deeper into this kind of stuff, and you're in Eastern Kentucky, I can do an on-farm consultation with you as long as you're selling your produce. And so I'd be happy to come out to the farm and help you think through designs of washing packing stations, or just simple things in terms of how to harvest more efficiently. So if that's something that you want to take advantage of, please feel free to shoot me an email, give me a phone call. I put my my contact info in the chat there for folks. Love to hear from you and love to come out and visit your farm and talk through. I can also help connect you to some of these grant projects and things like that too. So
How much does it cost for you to come out, Chris?
it costs $1,000. No, I'm just kidding. It's absolutely free. It's paid for through the Kentucky Ag Development Fund. And so I can do some free soil samples too while I'm out there. So no cost, just us trying to think through ways of how to help small scale farmers scale up and be more profitable.
All right, well, I'm going to launch the poll. There's no more comments. It is unanimous, so please be honest, because it's going to help us help you all in the long run. So, all right, well, I'm launching it. Great. Thank you all very much. That ends the one small fryer hen, Chris. Thank you all very much. That ends our workshop tonight. Please feel free to contact us if you have any questions.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much.